From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump shocks the Middle East and maybe the world by offering to relocate 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in the Middle East and then own the territory, clean it up, and develop it. Critics have dismissed this as fantasy or worse, but is there a method to the seeming madness of intervening in Gaza? That's our subject for today on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of those pages, and I'm here with my colleagues Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel. So welcome, and well, Bill, Donald Trump never ceases. And let's listen to him at a press conference Tuesday with Bibi Netanyahu.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different.
Well, Kim, what in the name of Mar-a-Lago is Donald Trump up to here?
Well, if you listen to the press and Democrats and critics of Donald Trump, this is somehow going to amount to ethnic cleansing, as if he were going to round up millions of Palestinians against their will and forcibly relocate them somewhere. It's imperialism. It's obviously backtracking on all of his campaigning in which he said he didn't want to engage in more foreign intervention. But I think the key words that mattered in that statement, Paul, was he said, it's time to do something different. All right. And the reality is we've been talking about a two-state solution for decades and decades, and it's gotten us nowhere. I could name all the number of times: 2000 Camp David Summit, the Taba Summit in 2001, all the way up to the 2013, 2014 peace talks. It's never gotten us anywhere. If you look all the way back to when this was first floated, the idea of separate Israeli and Arab states, we can go back 80 years to the 1937 British Peel Report. Okay, we've made no progress. And I would take Mike Waltz, Donald Trump's national security advisor, and listen to what he said. And he said, look, it's going to bring the entire region to come to their own solution if they don't like Mr. Trump's solution. So I view that as a kind of Donald Trump, the businessman, putting out the maximalist offer, saying, yeah, let's shake up the way everyone thinks, but mostly to pressure the players in the region to finally deal with their own problems, the Palestinian issue, and to take part in a new future. And they can do it that way, or they could do it in ways that might terrify them that Donald Trump is putting on the table.
Speaking of maximalist offers, let's listen to Donald Trump talk about the dream of a Gaza Riviera.
I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell. And those people will now be able to live in peace. We'll make sure that it's done world class. It'll be wonderful for the people. Palestinians mostly we're talking about. And I have a feeling that despite them saying no, I have a feeling that the king in Jordan and that the general president, but that the general in Egypt will open their hearts and will give us the kind of land that we need to get this done.
And Bill, interesting on a couple of notes there. I want to get into the Jordan and Egypt issue later, but just in terms of his expression of sympathy for the Palestinians, I mean, he accurately describes their circumstance, right? It is hell on earth there. I mean, it's been leveled, by the bombing and the fighting. 50,000 Palestinians or so have died in the fighting. Hamas started the fight. Hamas still runs the place, basically, now even with the ceasefire in place. The White House backtracked some the day after Trump's statement on the question of U.S. troops into the region, said he's not committed yet to do that. But Trump does seem to be serious about doing something here, at least about the cleanup of the area. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said a day or two later after the presser that Israel may, in fact, turn supervision of Gaza over to the U.S. I mean, do you think that is at all realistic?
I don't know what he means turn over. It seems to me he has an idea like a management company overlooking a project. It wasn't spelled out, and as you point, the White House backed away. I think, look, if you look at the details and you look at this, it seems very unrealistic, like a fantasy. But as you hinted before, I think what he's doing is laying out a hopeful vision for the Palestinians, and there's a lot of realism in his statement. The realism that Israel is not going to tolerate Hamas back in control of Gaza. So that's a non-starter. And that means a two-state solution. I mean, two-state solution was such a rote phrase. I can remember it in the Bush administration. We'd routinely say we're hoping for a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace. Yeah, and I'm not faulting them, just saying that was a handy thing to say. Trump's pointing out its bankruptcy, and I think the editorial the Journal had summed it up quite nicely, because in this expansive view of what the Palestinian people should enjoy, peace and prosperity in a place not bombed out, that's nice, that's not a place of despair. I think he's calling out the Arab countries. They always rhetorically support the Palestinians, but they don't support Palestinians coming on their soil. Again, Trump's very realistic. They can't be there while they're being reconstructed. There's unexploded bombs and all sorts of things. So they're going to have to go somewhere, at least temporarily. And I think he's being very realistic, and the Arabs have been very unrealistic. And the result of that, all these years, think of all the Arabs could do. They have the money from the oil. They have the money. They also could do a lot in security, like Arab troops instead of Israeli or American troops and they don't do it. So I think Donald Trump is basically calling them out, putting forward a hopeful vision. Maybe it won't come true in all its parts, but he's saying this is what we should aspire to. And I'd like to see the Arabs take the lead. And so far, they're not.
No, in fact, so far they've reacted in horror at the prospect. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the role of Egypt and Jordan in the solutions to the Palestinian issue in Gaza. And could they be relocated there when we come back? Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch, the daily opinion podcast of the Wall Street Journal, and I am here with Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Take those near neighbors in particular, Kim, Jordan and Egypt. I mean, they have a history of shunning the Palestinians in Gaza. The last thing they want is an influx of Palestinian refugees. I mean, in Egypt, El-Sisi, the president, wasn't even willing to take families, women and children into temporary refugee camps at the height of the Gaza war. They wouldn't let them cross the border in the least. And remember all the fuss by the international media and so on about the horror of the Gazans were suffering. Well, one way to limit that horror would have been to let them go to the Sinai, which is a big, expansive place. But Egypt is worried about Hamas and radical Palestinians infiltrating with the families, so they don't want them. I mean, Israel offered Gaza back to Egypt when they handed back the Sinai as part of the Camp David Accords. And Egypt said, no, you keep it. And as for Jordan, I mean, the Hashemite kingdom has never wanted Palestinians and famously expelled the Palestinian nationalists in 1971 with the Black September incident, where they threatened the rule of the Hashemite kingdom. And King Abdullah, who's the successor, the King Hussein, who made that decision at that time, he also said in October of 2023, no refugees here, Palestinian refugees here. So in a way, Trump is calling their bluff. and saying, are you willing to do something about this problem you seem to care so deeply about?
They've been playing this double game for a long, long time, and the amount of hypocrisy in it is really quite stunning. I've been really struck in the wake of Donald Trump's comments, all of the honesty in the press and the comments on the background from many of these officials in these neighboring states saying, well, oh my goodness, the security risks of having Palestinians in our country are extraordinary. Oh, really? Like, what do you think Israel's been dealing with for decades now? And of course, this is hypocrisy. They want Israel to deal with that problem. They want them to have to handle it. They have no love for the Palestinian people. But, and this is where the double game comes in, they also love to have them there, Paul, in Gaza and have this kind of conflict and strife because it allows them to beat on Israel and say, oh, you're doing such a terrible job handling Gaza. You're so mean to the Palestinians. If you would just do a two-state solution, everyone could live in peace and we could be your friend, when they don't really want that. The status quo is easier for them. They haven't had to deal with the problems in their own backyard. And it's been convenient because, as mentioned, it allows them to maintain Israel as the villain in this scenario. And I think the ask that Donald Trump is having here is, look, you stand up, you can't claim the Palestinian people as your cause and then not do something to help in this environment.
So the question, Bill, you mentioned this before, if international community or U.S. troops or whoever are going to be in there, U.S. civilians, cleaning up the bombs, cleaning out the rubble, rebuilding, it would help if the civilians could live somewhere else in the interim. But where? I mean, where are they going to go? If they can't go to Egypt and they can't go to Jordan, I mean, you don't want to put them in Syria because there's fighting going on in Syria. And where would they be willing to go that would take them? I don't have an answer.
No, I don't either. It's interesting, though, even here, we've been told for so long since Israel started fighting back after October 7th, we've been told that Gaza is one giant prison controlled by the Israelis. And now Trump is saying, well, maybe they should get out of prison and have a better life. And all of a sudden, how horrible. You're saying, take them out of there. I mean, it's crazy. As you suggested, Paul, it's just pointing to the hypocrisy all around. And I think Trump is not really proposing a solution as much as putting his hand on the table and saying, you come up with one. Again, if the Arabs had the will, there's so much they could do. At some point, the Arabs have to take control of the Middle East as a force for good, cooperating and putting down terrorism. But until they do, the irony of their position is that they default to Israel and the U.S. Kim mentioned their hypocrisy on Hamas. The irony is that you see in their attitude toward Palestinian refugees, they look at Hamas the exact same way as Netanyahu does. Netanyahu is not going to go through all this only to have Hamas revitalize itself on Gaza. I mean, Hamas may be the only group that likes Gaza burnt out, reduced to rubble, because it inflames their grievances and gives them a base to attack. And I think this speech really marks a turning point and hopefully to a more realistic view of the Middle East.
Well, you mentioned Hamas, Bill. That is, of course, one of the words that Donald Trump didn't mention in his news conference. He didn't talk about it. And Kim, that Hamas is now still the de facto controlling power in Gaza now that the Israeli troops have moved out. And of course, they continue to hold sway over the people of Gaza. Now, in some cases, some people would argue that that's the way the public wants it, because, in fact, they voted for Hamas way back in the middle of the mid-2000s decade when they had a choice between Hamas and Fatah. But since then, it was, one man, one vote once. And, if you disagree with Hamas, you get tossed off buildings or you get shot in the head. And then your family gets shot or you get hung in the public square. That's the way Hamas deals with even moderate dissenters. So what does Trump do if he wants to send in American forces, not necessarily the 82nd Airborne, but perhaps, some civilian engineers and reconstruction people into Gaza, they could easily become targets of Hamas.
My argument is that, Donald Trump did not mention Hamas in this speech, that actually another reason that he was laying all of this out was, in fact, to put pressure on Hamas. Remember, we are still at the beginning of this tentative ceasefire in which we've had some hostage exchanges, and some Gazans are beginning to head back to the areas that they were dislocated from. But Donald Trump has made it somewhat clear, at least in the conversation surrounding that press conference, that his negotiators that are now in there doing the next steps for what will be the next phase do not necessarily feel bound by anything that Biden's negotiators have done beforehand. And the other part of what came out in that press conference, which didn't get nearly as much attention because all of the news was on Donald Trump's Gaza Riviera, was Donald Trump said that he was going to decide within the space of a month whether or not to support Israel's idea of annexing the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And this is designed to send a message to Hamas, which is, you've got a month to get your act together, to speed up some of these negotiations, and to see how much you will give on this question of rebuilding, etc. So I think there was a message sent to the leadership there that there will be only so much tolerance. It was kind of Trump sending a rocket that way, sort of like the post he put out before he came into office saying, if you haven't returned these hostages, there will be hell coming after you. He is continuing that pressure and also trying to get the regional players to think a little differently, to put Hamas on the back foot, not necessarily just depend on the notion that things are going to return to the status quo ante. They're not.
Well, boy, I mean, if Israel did annex the West Bank, it would be a seismic event
yes.
and would create all kinds of other issues. And then the other thing in the background here, Bill, is the prospect of an Israel-Saudi Arabia peace deal. It's been in the works behind the scenes for some time. The Biden administration desperately wanted it to come to fruition, but the Gaza war got in the way. Saudi Arabia wanted enough cover of the ceasefire to be able to proceed, and it also wants at least the process beginning for a two-state solution. And I think Saudi Arabia wants that not because they have any great love for the Palestinians, but because they have some domestic political pressures that they want to make sure they can say, see, we're looking out for the Palestinians. And Netanyahu wants a deal like that too, because it would extend the Abraham Accords and create a new Middle East of Israeli and Sunni Arab cooperation. That would be a big counterpoint to Iran. But all of this in Gaza is getting in the way. And the question is, could Trump's offer shake things up so that Saudi Arabia could change its terms of engagement in Gaza?
I think that's one of the big questions, Paul. You put your finger on it. Like with the Saudis and Iran, it illustrates that the big divide in the Middle East is not between Israel and the Arab world. It's between the Sunnis and the Shia, and Iran and Saudi Arabia. Maybe Egypt are the best representatives, although Iran's not Arab, they're Persian. And that's a big thing. They're all terrified. All the Arab states are terrified of Iran. But as you say, the Palestinian issue, giving lip service that constrains them from doing what they want to do and what they think is in their best interest. And I don't know whether Trump's gambit will work, but he's trying to break that lock and get in there and forge a new reality for negotiations, for moving ahead, and so forth. And I think the ultimatum on the West Bank is a lot like his ultimatum after he was elected, but before he's sworn in, saying there better be a hostage deal before I take office or all hell will break loose.
Yeah, he said that all the hostages should be released or all hell will break loose. Well, all the hostages haven't been released. There's just that first stage. There's still some 60 hostages, dead or alive, that are suspected of being in there, even beyond the ones that are being released, 33 being released as part of this original deal. So Trump probably doesn't want to be reminded of that.
Well, I don't know. I think Trump doesn't care about details. There was movement and there wasn't movement before. And in this case, like, are they going to agree to every dotted I and crossed T on this plan? No. But if they can move out of the current stalemate and just start from new assumptions, that would be progress. You've spoken on it many times before. Trump makes these big, grandiose either predictions, threats, promises, and then he either backs off from them when he gets some concession or modifies them. But that's how he operates.